It's v.h.s.x. What do you mean?
Alright everybody, welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're doing a reaction discussion video from SetoMary titled Why the DBD Anti-Tunnel PTB is Good News. Now, I was recommended this by one of you guys in the Discord server, so if you want to go ahead and join that and recommend your own videos to have a discussion about, you go ahead and join it. Make sure you hit the knife emoji at the bottom of the rules to make sure you confirm and be able to talk with the rest of us, like-minded individuals or otherwise, and have conversations about DBD or other stuff, you know, just for fun in the community. But with that being said, I want to jump into this and really continue to hear other perspectives on this, because as you guys know, I was extremely against the anti-tunnel PTB because I think there's just a fundamental misunderstanding of what there is that's going on.
One guy, and then people just give up and stop playing.
This should not be a thing. There shouldn't be some strategy that both sides acknowledge is sweaty and way more likely to win that makes the game less fun for the other side. Characters can be sweaty and still be healthy. Builds can be sweaty and still be healthy. Playing with comms, or taking the game more seriously, and being sweaty as a playstyle is fine, but a strategy should not just be objectively more likely to win, to the point where it is so frowned upon that it is collectively considered to sometimes not even be a real win. This is absolutely game ruining.
There is a massive contradiction that we're hearing here because of the fact that we're starting off by saying that this one thing should not be in the game, but yet right before you make that exact statement, you're going to say another factor or another thing that is in the game that also can follow that same category. So in this instance, we're talking about tunneling, I'm assuming, and tunneling, for whatever reason, is frowned upon, and we can get into what that is and why it's frowned upon. And it's frowned upon, and we're saying that it shouldn't be in the game. But comms, right? Comms directly breaks the balancing of the game against killers. There are killers that are completely powerless when you start to communicate where their position is in the map. A character like that that comes to mind is Ghostface. A character based around not knowing where he is, and then you call out where he is, and now you're not surprised. You're not going to necessarily get down that easily anymore because you know where he is, so you can just preemptively run away, and he has nothing he can do against that, right? As an example, comms directly, and the game is not balanced around 4-man teams and comms. And that's why that a lot of people, when they talk about this game and they express their frustrations, that the first thing that comes to mind is, well, they have communication, so most of my plays are not going to work. Most of my strategies are not going to work. Most of my perks are not going to work because they are able to directly counter it just because they already know either what perk I'm using and they call it out, or they know where I'm at and they call it out, or they see me walking around undetectable, they call it out. So there's a contradiction there. Like you're saying that tunneling in this case shouldn't be in the game, but yet powerful builds with comms in a Swift is perfectly fine when that also directly breaks the balancing. So to be fair, it should be that if it's either all of it is all right or none of it is all right in this instance, because you can't just pinpoint the one thing and make it just only the killer strategy is just shouldn't be in there, but yet every other strategy that survivors also have is just there. Like, that there's an imbalance even within that logic,
And should have been addressed from the beginning of this game's inception. And now the community is so divided that we aren't even in a place where we can invalidate those arguments of people who blame things like camping, tunneling, and slugging wrongfully for every single match they lose. A system like the anti-tunneling system shouldn't just be in the game because survivors beg for it, but because it would make playing killer infinitely more logical, fun, and skillful.
So that statement right there is also extremely contradictory and disingenuous in a lot of ways, because if you're trying to say that it's going to be more thoughtful and skillful, that means that you're trying to say that strategies that already exist for a killer are not skillful, not logical, not based around strategy at all, not based around thought, you know, you're using your brain. And that in itself is completely untrue. And anybody who's played killer against any competent teams, anybody who has more than like 5 hours played on DBD would understand that strategy, playing the killer and trying to macro game with a killers that may not even have the best macro ability is going to be very difficult, especially if you don't have knowledge of the game. And unfortunately, it's also been proven with evidence through patch notes, through updates, through the things that we're seeing, that survivors are continuously getting handheld by the updates, right? Like even recently, we've gotten like more filler palettes in more, and which I will say there are some maps that needed those changes, that needed extra palettes. Borgo, Farm, and Haddonfield, okay. But then they also said Ormond. They also said like Macmillans or Auto Havens and stuff like that, which Auto Haven notoriously has plenty of palettes, all very playable. So like these are like the maps, like some of the maps I can agree with, but then other maps just really didn't need them. But the problem is they blanket like the whole entire like map selection, basically making some maps more playable, but then others even worse, which is just completely imbalanced. But that's unfortunately a side effect of trying to baby a side that's not trying to improve. And that's not to say that killers are also have skill issues. They do. They're in their own way. And I've already stated that many times. I've even displayed that when I've talked about going perkless in the past. So it's not like it's completely just going to be only the survivors that need to improve. Killers need to improve as well. But with the updates we're seeing, it's only been to handhold the survivors for free escapes, essentially. With the evidence that we're seeing with the patch notes each and every time. And another piece of evidence for that has obviously been there has been perks that have received buffs that were perfectly fine perks, really did not need to be improved upon. Resurgence is always something that comes to mind. 50% healing progress saves time, and it was a perfectly fine perk. Then they changed it to 70. Then Botany Knowledge got changed, so that doesn't have the 20% medkit, efficiency decrease. They decided to like buff up other healing perks that didn't need them. And then now we're even deeper into a healing meta, which directly affects almost every killer in the game. Differently, of course, but it still does. And Resurgence will make it already in the base game. You don't even have to buy that perk. You're essentially just getting 4-second heals, 5-second heals. Nobody can counteract that. Blight can't do that. Nurse can't do that. They can't just prevent the heal from being instantaneous underhooks. But those are just a few examples.
Be completely realistic. It's not like I'm saying that the PTB patch was a good patch of the game, although some sick part of me did enjoy it. No, my point is that it's quite literally good news, because it signals some good intentions from the devs, as well as some understanding that I think is important for making certain changes in the future. I can already hear what you might be saying. No, it shows they lack understanding. To which I say, I actually also agree. I think
the third option that's not really being stated is the fact that DBD understands that, I think, like the devs, I should say, they understand that a vast majority of the players are extremely casual and most likely don't want to improve. And that applies to both killers and survivors. The problem is that because there's the vast majority of the player base are on survivor, they're going to cater by giving them the vast majority of the hand-holding and not really giving killer anything. And because of that, we're seeing PTBs like this drop. Now, is the idea good? Of course, because trying to sort of move people away from a playstyle that people objectively don't like could be fine if done correctly. The biggest problem with this PTB changes that they were trying to pitch were that it was completely tone deaf and was not understanding exactly why people utilize these strategies, because it was so heavy-handed with how difficult these changes were to even circumvent, that people that weren't even trying to tunnel anybody were basically facing people who deliberately were abusing the system by getting in the way with body blocking, of course, because with everything included, if you were to slug them, because they know if they die, that all the gens get locked off, and then they won't regress or break anymore. They would get in the way, try to get body blocked, but if you slug them, they just get up on their own instantly anyway, because of the anti-slug change. So then it's either you have to somehow not kill them, but they're gonna be in the way, so you can't kill anyone else to continue to play nice, quote unquote. So it was like, what are you supposed to do? Like you still have a survivor just running around, being able to pressure the gens, being able to heal everyone, being able to save everyone. So you're like on two different avenues, you're making it extremely difficult for the killer to do anything, because you can't leave them alone, because they're going to just continue to apply pressure just because they exist and they're in the match. But then if you kill them, then you lock off all the gens. So then it's like, okay, well, I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. So it's like either way, you're going to have a tough time. There's really no strategy around that. So, and that has been shown with different creators all across the board, which I've actually covered on the channel before. Covered multiple different people showing what the issue is with these changes. And my sort of solution was saying, why not just take one of the changes and put it in there and see how it works with everything else, and slowly add everything in, rather than dumping all of it at once, so that we don't know what's the issue and what isn't. We don't know if it's the slugging like change that's causing problems. We don't know if it's like the tunneling change that's causing problems. We don't know if it's the gen lock off, the limit. We don't know. So if they weren't so quick to drop everything at once, we might have been able to actually conduct a real test to see if this is actually going to apply to the real game. And that is the main problem that people have with the PTB, that are trying to understand what the issues are.
Look, obviously, if that's how your game is played best at high level, you've done something horribly wrong. At the same time, however, I also admonished the community for being so toxic towards others just because of these gameplay loops, especially when doing absolutely nothing to combat them. Nowadays,
well, that right there, I would say, is not really a dev issue. That's more a community issue, like I've stated before. It's very evident that the vast majority of the player base are extremely casual, so when they're faced with any challenge or faced with anybody who's trying to play strategically, they end up throwing a tantrum or something like that. They get very upset. And it's also because of the divide between people saying it's a party game versus it's a competitive game. And because of that divide, also that's a bit of frustration that comes through, because the people who are playing casually probably consider it a little party game, and then when people play against what they believe the game is, they get upset. So it's a lot of factors that deal mainly with the viewpoint of the actual community. I disagree that it would be a dev problem. I don't think that's something that the devs can really control in that sense. And adding in a heavy-handed change, like at least with the anti-tunnel PTB specifically, with the one that we're referring to, was not going to offer that much of a difference in gameplay, especially when it so heavily favors Survivor with that update, and gives basically not really enough of an incentive for the killers to do so, especially when if you do, you get an okay bonus, but if you don't, the repercussions are even stronger than it would be just to follow along, which is the main issue with the changes.
Even before this patch, we had anti-camp and anti-tunnel base kit systems in place to mitigate the effects of this kind of thing. But back then, there were still very, very powerful perks that players could utilize to punish killers for this kind of undesired behavior. And yet the only tools players would typically bring to quote-unquote punish this kind of play were slurs, death threats, and the disconnect button.
I agree with that, though. I do agree with that. It even reigns true to this day, and that's unfortunately like the survivor side issue where they just refuse to bring counters. They refuse to bring things that can actually help them. They just want to have everything given to them. From the perspective that I am seeing with people that are complaining as hard as they do, it seems as if they are asking for changes that are just within the base kit at all times so they can walk around essentially with like 12 perks instead of actually bringing things that can counteract what they're going up against or counteract what the meta is, which a lot of the time it's usually trying to counter what the survivors have been bringing lately, depending on the update that they receive. At least when, because I do think that killer metas have been very stagnant, and I don't think they're very plentiful. Like the last time we've really had a killer meta was like the totem, meta, which like lasted, I think, less than a month. So like that really much, it just didn't really matter in that sense. It got nerfed very fast. But the dramaturgy finesse meta was still here. Like the healing meta is still here. Like the exhaustion meta, like as a whole, is still here. Like even then, we even got more perks added into the game that make exhaustion even faster. Vigil got overbuffed and is extremely overtuned now. So like these are things that are all sort of, at least when it comes to killer metas and stuff like that, is reactionary to what the heck is they're facing essentially. And that's why, they end up just running quad slowdowns, because obviously with efficiency being through the roof, whether it be with healing speeds, which was a form of slowdown that obviously got nerfed, with Sloppy Butcher and stuff like that. So healing has also been buffed with healing perks, so healing is even more efficient. Gens become more efficient as a result. So then the four slowdowns ends up becoming the main thing that they always have to end up bringing in that sense.
To get at is that even if it's the most effective tactic in the game, like tunneling, or an ineffective but convenient tactic like camping, these concepts at the end of the day truly are what ruins the Dead by Daylight experience.
I think that with a statement like this, it's really fundamentally misunderstanding what the purpose of these strategies are even for in the first place. Because the focus within the statement is sort of what it feels like to go up against it, but it fails to understand why that exists, and it fails to even sympathize with why they're even being used in the first place. Because I'm pretty sure if you were to ask any other killer players that are playing competitively or are playing to win their games and not just playing super casually, if they would continue to utilize these same strategies if they didn't need to, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't. They most likely wouldn't. They would just probably say that, at least speaking for myself in this case, because I can answer, I wouldn't use the strategies if they weren't necessary. Because at the end of the day, a strategy is a part of a toolbox that you use to solve a problem or to have a certain outcome occur. And so when we're talking about it in the sense that we're trying to claim it's overly convenient and it's the most efficient way to play, and it's like, yeah, it is the most efficient because of how the game as a whole functions. The generators are the easiest things to complete in the game, right? Like all you necessarily have to do is have, press a button down or toggle it, because it is a feature in the settings. Just have it press and then occasionally press spacebar. That's essentially what you're doing. And considering it's that easy to do, considering that every second that passes you're getting a charge into the actual objective, you're pressuring without even having to interact with the killer, the most efficient thing to do is to get them off of those objectives, right? So if you have one on a hook and one on the ground and you're chasing a third, the fourth one is going to have to go and save someone, or whatever combination of those things. To pull them off of the generators is what the strategy is for. That's what it does. And I think when people discuss this topic, it's for some reason it's always left out of the conversation, and it's always pointed in the direction that, oh, they're just bad. It's just a bad experience to face, and it's you need to take into account what the purpose of the actual strategy is. And as a result, you also see the same thing on the other side, where the reason that these even exist, even on the killer end as well, is the idea that they are trying to well, I should say on the survivor end, they are trying to extend their chase to waste the killer's time, right? Because if they pull the killer away from the objectives, then they can push the objectives, right? So it's a back and forth. One wants to stop the objective while the other one is trying to progress the objective. And if they can get the person away from them that are trying to, while they try to progress the objective, that is the point. So that's why exhaustions are survivor slowdowns, because like they can speed boost off and then waste more time. They, even with endurances and stuff like that, you're taking the time out to take a free hit, which will then prevent a down, which prevents people having to get off the objective. And for some, and like I've said, I don't know why it's not really included in conversations like these of why it is. It just seems like when I hear a lot of these conversations, it usually leads to trying to villainize the strategy and, oh, it just feels bad to go up against, and it's based off of just feelings. But we have to look at this logically and understand exactly why it happens and how we can then try to, if we're going to move past this, how we can then have the same amount of value but work in a way that will be more incentivized without heavily punishing the player for not following that path, in a way so that there is an option for both ends, right? So in the subject of the PTB here that we've had, it gave only one direction to go, and if you didn't follow it, well, looks like you can't even stop the objective at all. They get a massive bonus, and good luck, basically. So that directly affects like at least half the roster, and that of course does not mean that you're able to get much of a difference against like the strongest, which is usually what people complain the most about. And of course, sure, I mean, it solves that issue for one side, but then it opens up a brand new amount of problems and can of worms for another side, and then you have to then fix that somehow, and you just stop it from where it's at, and then solve it, then drop it in the game.
Either that or bugs. When I win a game, I want it to be understood and true that I deserved that win, and when I lose, I want the exact same to be true. Camping and tunneling, for both sides, ruin this dynamic, especially given a large part of the community is unwilling to ever do anything about it. And again,
I disagree to an extent, because obviously feeling if you deserve the win or not is purely, the perspective of the person winning. If they feel like they deserve to win, then that's purely opinionated. There's not really much I can say about that. However, utilizing the mindset of saying you don't deserve the win because you're utilizing killer strategies is just fundamentally flawed. Like, that is not at all logical. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And that, like, to be fair, because in the same token, we can look at Survivor and say the same thing. We can say, okay, well, you went to the edge map to get downed, and you also body blocked here, and you also utilized an exhaustion, so therefore your win is invalid. Or hey, you emoted so you can get down under a pallet, so that makes you invincible, so I can't pick you up, so therefore your win's invalid, your escape is invalid. And for whatever reason, it's only widely accepted that if a killer utilizes a strategy, only they don't have their win validated by the other side. But if a survivor does anything that I just listed, or any other variations of things you could think of, and then the killer will say that's invalid, all of a sudden, like, that doesn't exist, they don't hear it, oh, that's not true as well. I think there is a massive disconnect in the DBD community as a whole, which is mainly focused on the fact that for some reason killers just can't use strategy, despite the fact that they're one player versus four. But I guess, right? It's really strange. Even after all this time, I still don't understand the disconnect with that. It doesn't make any sense.
I'm not saying you should have to run these perks, but if you are willing to, again, do things like threaten someone's life, or just in general scapegoat these playstyles as the reason you lose every time you lose, you probably should be running the silly little perk that punishes the playstyle first. So
I do agree with that, honestly, and I also have to add on to that point by saying that these strategies are also counterable. Like, I've gone against players that have a very good amount of experience going against these strategies and have countered it. Like, they are able to still win. It's not like it's impossible. I just think that when they see it, a lot of the time, a lot of players will just throw their hands in the air and say, well, good luck, good game. We lost, you know what I mean? And the thing is that I've seen it before. I've even on stream, I've seen it too. For at least everybody to see. Like, I have gone against players that are getting, like, you could say tunneled. And for me as the killer, I'm like, I'm already at 3 gens. I need somebody out of the game, because by the time I can get another down and then another down, it's probably going to be 1 gen because of gen speed or whatever combination of things. And I need somebody out of the game, because I as the killer, I need to kill, right? So that's the whole point. It's like a survivor not doing a gen. It's like you need to do gens. So I've seen players that just hide, right? Like, they don't get spotted. They play extremely safe. They try to stay as away from the killer as much as they can. And more times than not, it causes a lot more pressure to be applied, because then now you have to go for other players that probably either have 1 or 0 hooks. And then those people could potentially have more anti-tunnel in their kit. So then if you try to go for them to try to get a little bit more pressure, you just eat an endurance or you eat something else, causing even less pressure to be applied, which leans even further into their own thing. So it's like, it is possible to counter these things.
Let me describe to you what a perfect DBD would look like. A world where the concepts of tunneling and camping are mostly eliminated, where bringing up these words is seen as really cringe in most scenarios.
Well, I want to add on to this conversation is, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have gen rushing, we wouldn't have ridiculous endurance perks and second chance perks that offer free health states for playing badly. We wouldn't have any issues like having to not run slowdowns. We would have a more chase oriented game where we actually can focus on chase time and actually winning because of our own knowledge and not because of perks. And on killer, it would be nice to not need to have to use strategies all the freaking time, especially when playing D tier, C tier. It would be nice, it would be great, to play Ghostface or Pig or Skull Merchant or Trapper or something of that nature, and to be able to not have to go, well, I'm at 3 and somebody's got to go, like, well, these gens are kind of quick, like, it's just kind of ridiculous. But that is in a perfect world, and that is ultimately, not really what's in the cards, especially with the direction that these updates have been going. It leans very heavily into the it really favors Survivor very heavily. So unfortunately, it just ends up leading to killers having to then continue to utilize strategies or continue to switch to the strongest killers they can possibly pick from in order to feel like they have a fighting chance in a match, especially if they don't have the amount of time and hours to dedicate to actually improve at their favorite killers, to be able to get to a point where they can compete at a good enough level. And I'm speaking from personal experience, because despite the coping that we see around the DBD community, I still am performing very well with Ghostface, despite him being a bottom tier killer. And that is because of my knowledge of the game, my understanding of the character. Like, I've spent so much time, really honing in my ability with that character and trying out different strategies, trying out different sort of perks and add-on combinations and things like that, to be able to finally get to a good point where I can say, yeah, this is the most consistent build I can run. This is the most consistent I can get with this character, I would say. Probably give or take a couple of things. And currently, I think I'm at an 84% win rate according to the spreadsheet I've been working on. So not terrible. But that is obviously not applicable to every Ghostface player. Like, I would say that the vast majority of even killer players are really not at that same level. I would not say that they are able to go against the toughest teams and be able to at least continuously have decent enough win rate, especially even with a character like Ghostface. And there's not anything wrong with that. I got all the love in the world for my killer mains out there. But I'd have to point out, that it is still a skill issue at the end of the day, despite the coping, despite the frustration that I know a lot of killer players out there experience, because I've experienced it myself, and I've gone through like all sorts of phases with this game, and only recently I think I've been motivated once again to play and really hone in on my ability and my skill, and to want to be one of the top Ghostface players in the leaderboards and stuff like that. Have I realized, like, I've been coping so heavily that I proved myself wrong with my own spreadsheet, which is insane. Which is a whole nother discussion that I'm probably gonna have to bring up in its own video. But anyway,
as well as the sway their opinions hold. As an example, when I play with friends, if someone complains about tunneling, but I don't see them taking endurance hits or getting out of being carried with DS, I literally just say, no, you're really not getting tunneled. But that kind of brings us to where we are today, because I think it's evident to everyone that these concepts still exist, with tunneling even still being the most effective strategy.
I think that there is a massive issue with the DVD community where they use the sort of catch-all terms, like the buzzwords like tunneling, camping, and slugging, to try to like villainize the killer player for just trying to either just play the game, or they probably haven't even done any of those strategies before, and they get upset. They just get upset, and they call everything just tunneling. They call everything camping, when you can literally have like one hooked everybody and gone back for another person. Oh, now you're tunneling. It's like, okay, but everybody got hooked once. Like, what are you talking about? But let's continue.
Especially if you do it in a way that games the system, such as waiting out the 10-second endurance. So that's where the new systems come into play.
I also want to point out that I've actually displayed, with shout out to DeBrownie if you're watching this, and shout out to JC Glitchmaster as well for this, and shout out to True Talent for showing this. But a lot of the time you also will see Survivor teams that face tunneling and pretty much have a skill issue. In specifically DeBrownie's video, he was able to display that this particular Jeff was getting tunneled by his own account. He kept running into him, playing Huntress on RPD, just kept running into him, kept running toward, like, just ended up in his face multiple times, and just kept getting down, and then wanted to claim you got tunneled. But it's like, you made no moves to get out of the way. You made no moves to move across the map or go around or do anything like that. You ran into his face because you don't have any map awareness, which boils down to a skill issue on the Survivor end. Getting tunneled, a lot of the time, it ends up becoming, and I would say a lot of the time, because there's some instances where it's simply just, you know, just circumstance. But obviously, most of the time, I would say 80% of the time, maybe I'm going to even be generous, let's say 90% of the time, that getting tunneled is a bit of a skill issue. Because either A, you're not making moves to get away, or B, you're not looping long enough to actually help the team apply pressure. Or if you're doing everything right and you're getting chased down and your teammates aren't pushing the objective, then it's not your fault. And you shouldn't be getting mad at the killer for that. You should be getting mad at your teammates for not pushing the objective, for not trying to help you out, for not playing strategically. That in itself is their problem and not yours. And I think that's another thing that I think a lot of survivors should really take into account when facing any killers that play strategically, is to take a look at the HUD and see what your teammates are also doing, so you can kind of get an understanding of how the pressure is being applied, how well does somebody doing in chase, like, because it even shows you a little indicator, like with the little legs, like next to the person's like name or whatever, of who's being chased. So you can kind of go, okay, I'm on this gen for about 10 seconds. This person just got down, so they're pretty bad at chase. They might get killed, so I'm gonna have to figure out, you know, how to kind of maneuver around this. Maybe if I get chased, I can hold my own, and then maybe my teammates can push it, you know, blah, blah, blah. Now, obviously, this is different with solo queue, of course. But with solo queue, I wouldn't imagine you should expect to always escape, especially when your teammates are usually out to kill you a lot more than the killer does. And that's its own thing. But in most cases, that's like, and I would say in that sense, that's your teammate's skill issue, not yours. You didn't do anything wrong if you're just pushing the objective and you're trying to do your thing. But like I've said, the HUD is there. It shows you what everyone's doing. So it really shouldn't be a shock or a surprise, unless you're like looking off in the sky, you know, looking to somewhere else while everything's going down on the game. But, you know, that's its own thing.
eliminate those concepts as best as they can. Listen, in a perfect world, there will still be punishment for tunneling, but it shouldn't be something you think of as often. Let me explain that better. I don't want a world where killers have to seek out specific survivors and they're only allowed to hook them. I don't want a DBD where your goal is to end the game with 12 hooks. I want a game where going for whatever survivor is the most convenient is the best or most incentivized strategy for the killer, and where that convenience leads to scenarios that make the game more enjoyable for survivors, such as letting them typically get to play longer. Imagine it like this. I don't want who you are chasing to matter to the killer at all, just that you get your hit and eventually you're down.
So that's the thing that I've heard before, that we want survivors to be able to play the game longer. But I disagree, because I've seen, like, if that were really true, I don't think that survivors would be pushing the gens as rapidly as they try to do. At least from my perspective, because I've seen teams that try to push the gens as quickly as humanly possible to fly out the gate as quickly as possible. So I think that if we're trying to make everybody in the lobby play a longer match, which I don't even think would be a good idea, because, you know, matches on average last about 10 minutes, maybe the most 15. So how much longer, which is the first point I want to make, how much longer are we trying to have these matches last? Because 10 minutes is pretty good, like a pretty good amount of time. 8 to 10 minutes has been the average for a lot of the matches that I've timed when I was on stream. That's the average. And that's with and without slowdown. I remember conducting that test, and I ran the same killer, different builds, back to back, and wanted to see how much slowdown really affected. It pretty much did nothing. And how much longer do we need these games to go? Because if the highest we've seen is like 15 minutes on average, and 10 is usually like about 10 to 15 is a good range, I would say, for the average. How much longer are we needing this to go? Because I don't think anybody's trying to sit around in a DVD match for like 20 minutes. Like, I think that's kind of ridiculous. But also, if we're trying to, here's my second point. Also, if we're trying to increase the amount of time that survivors are in the game, you're gonna have to also increase the amount of time it takes for them to complete the objective, and make it so that the killer also can play longer as well. Because if the survivors can just run around the map and do whatever they want, the killer's gonna have to kill somebody at some point. Like, that's what they do. That's their entire job. That's their entire objective. So we need to take into account like what it is that we're trying to increase here, and we need to be very specific as to what it is that we're trying to do. And if we're trying to get people, like, you know, survivors to last longer, we need to reframe it as everybody in the match should be able to play a little bit longer as a whole, because there's 5 people in this lobby.
Because, well, aside from the reasons I mentioned earlier, this is also the way I enjoy playing the game most. When I play killer, typically I'm most happy when I hit and hook whatever survivor I can, and don't even pay attention to hook states or who is who. The shitty part is that even doing this, I still get told I'm tunneling sometimes.
So I will say, with the perspective being offered in the video here, this is a I would say anecdotal perspective, so I can't really argue against that. And if you decide to play that way and you're faced with, oh, you're tunneling, that is, like, I would say, is a community problem and the them problem, not a you problem. And I would say you just gotta let it go in that sense, because at the end of the day, if you're just playing the game and you're not even worrying about who's been hooked at all, then that means you're probably not trying to win your game, which means that you probably should just like continue on to your next game. Just hit continue, move on. Like, I don't think that them being upset really has no effect on your gameplay, should really have no effect on your experience with the game, because obviously they're gonna get frustrated whether you breathe wrong, you look up at the sky too long, you decided to walk around the map a little too loudly, you happen to have a certain cosmetic they don't like. Like, it's like, we've seen this even recently with people like disconnecting lately. Like, they just disconnect off of everything. It doesn't matter what you do. Like, play a killer they don't like the weapon you're carrying, they don't like the perk you picked. Like, they just get mad in DC anyway. So I don't think that should have any application in this conversation when talking about why this particular change is arriving. by any means.
Typically by players playing the same characters and using the same outfit, funnily enough. Essentially, in any scenario, I want the killer's best move to be just getting value wherever they see it.
Jesus
so if
Christ,
the killer
really
is
bad
following
pig.
2 survivors, and one of them is slightly more out of position than the other, I want the killer to always be incentivized to target the out of position survivor. Now, you could argue the new system doesn't do this, quite the opposite. But you also have to admit this isn't the case on live either.
I disagree to an extent, because what is being sort of presented here is to play killer in a way that's mindless, in the same way that Survivor does. And the thing is that killer fundamentally is a side that is quite strategic just by nature. Like you're 1 against 4. You have to focus on macro, right? Like having to micromanage 4 different people doing 4 different things, and you have to have timing down, pathing down, knowing who to hit, when to hit, and understanding your abilities and stuff like that. The killer side fundamentally is focused around trying to play well and be strategic. So when you're trying to say, oh, just let them hook whoever whenever, it's only self-indulgent and doesn't take into account everybody who's playing the game, and is going to also offer a nightmare of a balancing thing. Because how do you sort of you're trying to kind of box everybody in to play in a way that just like turns your brain off, and you just hook whoever, and then it's like, but that's not how DBD works, because that's just functionally not going, like, this doesn't work that way, obviously. Now, on top of that point, there is the other idea that the game doesn't function that way, that you should be chasing who's out of position. And I would disagree with that entirely. I think that if any killer player that actually knows what they're doing understands that when they're looking at, say, 1 to 2 survivors, they're gonna have to weigh the options. Do I go for the one running to Shack, or do I go for the one running into toward the corner of the map? I'm going to obviously go for somebody who's not near a strong area, so I can down them, regardless of if this person is running into, say, Shack, for example. I'm like, I need to go for something that's a little faster, because this is going to take way too long if I'm going to chase them into this strong loop. You know what I mean? So that I have to disagree with as well.
If Survivor 1 is on death hook and Survivor 2 has never been hooked, obviously a good killer is going to try to avoid Survivor 2 and aim for Survivor 1. I'm not saying this is a bad thing on the killer's part. Again, killing is his job. But I'd rather the game not force removing a player to be the best strategy.
So that right there is extremely contradictory. And hopefully I can offer an example that has the same line of logic, but on the other side of things. So the line of reasoning here is a little bit off, because I've heard this as well from, and it doesn't really follow it doesn't really follow a logical reasoning, because of the fact that we're having to take into account that the killer's job is to kill the survivor. So by not killing the survivor, then what is the killer supposed to do? And the same thing I've also heard with Survivor is they go, you'll hear killer players say, oh, I'm getting gen rushed a lot. And it's like, okay. And then the survivor will say, okay, so what am I supposed to do? My objective is to gen. It works both ways in that sense. The objective is directly do the gen or kill them so they don't do gen. Very simple. So like I've said, like what we're trying to pitch here is the killer doesn't kill, and we're trying to say that, oh, they shouldn't kill people, and we're trying to say that they should be in the match. But the problem is, if they're in the match, they can, like I've stated earlier, they can heal everybody, save people, they can push the gens, they can touch totems, they can do whatever it is that can pressure the killer because they're still there. So strategically, you want to remove somebody who can apply pressure to you to make you gain an advantage in that situation. It's the same way that you want a survivor to last long in chase in order for the killer to not stop you from finishing the generator. It works the same exact way. because if somebody doesn't die, the objective can be pushed, and then therefore they can all escape. That's how it works. Power in numbers. And I've heard that before, and it's a flawed perspective, because you are trying to fundamentally remove the objective from the killer's, entire thing. That's what he does. It's not like he goes around and does jumping jacks and waves at people and hands them lollipops. Like they go around and they kill the survivor. Like, that's in the name. They're not the entertainers, they're the killers. Like, that's what they do.
So how does this all wrap into the devs understanding those two concepts well? Well, let's get into that. The first is that they understand incentives. In order to make the game balanced and designed in the way I described, they need to give more incentive to targeting other players and less incentive to tunneling a player out. And they've definitely done that in strides. There are a lot of parts of this system that reward you for targeting a non-tunneled player, as well as parts of this system that punish you pretty heavily for tunneling someone out.
I do agree with that statement that it does provide incentives that play in a way that the devs want, right? But like I've stated before, and like it has been shown evidently from other creators, the system can be abused. With the PTB version, it was pretty much easily abused. Because if you're like I've stated before, like, the fundamental reason why these strategies get used is because these survivors are able to apply pressure just because they're there. And because we're taking that into account, we need to remove somebody so that the 1v3 can begin, and then from there you can kind of trade out hooks and apply pressure that way. That's the entire point. And of course, there's a punishment that was applicable there as well. But from everybody's perspective, and even from my own, from obviously because when I've seen what people talk about with these changes, the punishment was way too heavy-handed, like extremely heavy-handed. And it did not offer enough of an incentive, with it being such a strong downside that the upside really is not even close. Especially when, like I've stated, the system could be exploited pretty much right in the PTB, like within a day of the PTB being out or so. Like, they were able to immediately start exploiting it and using it in their favor, because the killer had their hands tied against that person who had two hooks. Because they wanted to follow the funny little yellow circle, they couldn't actually do their jobs. And then if they, for whatever reason, accidentally end up killing somebody for whatever reason, then they just get punished with them not being able to use most of their perks, or not able to prevent the gens from going up, and then they also gain a repair speed on the survivor end. It's just too heavy-handed. Like, it's way too heavy-handed. Like, you pretty much automatically lose the game because of one single hook state that you had no control over. And on top of that, we also see that with killers' abilities such as Sadako, which were directly punished for just using their power, which Sadako is already a fundamentally weak killer, so even with a change like this, you nerf the killer even further, making it completely pointless to even use that character in the first place. So that is the main issue that we're experiencing here. And that is why it was such a controversial sort of change, and why it was such a controversial sort of PTB.
From rewarding you with gen damage, to punishing you by blocking gens or giving survivors bonus gen speed, the disparity in reward between hooking a player close to death or a player you haven't hooked has narrowed pretty far. But this isn't the only facet of this that's important. The other concept they understand is convenience. But I've realized that if we want to understand this concept a little better, I need to better explain why I think it's important that the game reward targeting whoever is convenient. I want you to, for a moment, try to imagine you're showing the game to a friend who's never tried it before. Right now, as killer, your buddy could have a game where they are constantly getting hits, downs, and hooks, but end up losing the game after hooking every player twice. They come out of it with the
Okay, well, I hate to say it, right? But right off the bat, okay, I don't think any new player is two hooking everybody. So this example is pretty flawed and shaky from the very inception, because new players that start playing the game are not thinking, oh, I better two hook everyone. Like, they're probably going, well, I'm playing a killer and ideally I should try to kill them, so they just got off hook and they're already injured, I might as well just chase them again. That's their line of logic. I've heard that many times when people start the game. They go, oh, I just wanted to, my job is to kill them, so I went after them again. And then they kept saying this, like, tunneling. I don't know what that is. And I was like that's what you see. So, like, to say that, like, they're starting off the game and they're two hooking everyone, how would they know to do that if they're brand new? Unless you're deliberately saying don't tunnel, which means you're supposed to go after every other survivor twice, which means you're setting them up for failure. And I think that's not fair to your friend. Like, you're gonna give them a bad time before they even loaded up the game. Like, that's not right. Like, I disagree with that. So that example, I would say, is a flawed example. I would not use that in this conversation.
Adrenaline of feeling like they did a great job, only to see that the gates are powered, and before they know it, everyone is gone. Now instead, let's say they just focus on one player entirely, and have a much more rough time in their chases, struggling to get their hits, but finally get a kill, and end up doing the same to the next player, who, maybe sensing the tunnel coming, just gives up early. They may even snowball the match into a 3K or 4K. Immediately following this, they tell you this game sucks, and they don't want to have to play like that to actually win. Okay, I get this is just...
That example is completely flawed. I hate to say it, it's completely flawed. Like, there is nobody who's starting this game is going to say that, unless you deliberately frame it in a sense that, oh, I have to tunnel, like, and that's not fair. Like, like nobody's doing that. Like, there is no new player I can imagine that would ever think that or ever do that, because if you're loading into a horror game, which is what this game is marketed as, like, hey, you can play as a horror villain from a movie like A Nightmare on Elm Street or Halloween or or Chucky, like from whatever have you. They're not going to sit there and say, I shouldn't kill them, that's not right. Like, they're thinking, I'm playing as the killer, I should be killing them. Like, whether which way or how I do it is up to me at that point. Like, that example's completely incorrect. I wouldn't use that example at all, because you're coming in with the assumption that this brand new player has the knowledge of the brain rotted community, which is not at all accurate unless they were within the community for a while before they even started playing.
A hypothetical, but I want you to think about the principles of the game that I've tried to put on display. They say your ability to engage with hypotheticals is a sign of intelligence, so please just hear me out. Any game where you are actively doing your job, and effectively at that, should reward you for such. Gaming a system and focusing on exploits that aren't engaging is way, way less fun for any game than a high-paced gameplay loop that rewards you for keeping up on the fly.
So that right there is why there's and that right there I think is very telling. When you describe strategy as exploiting, you've completely lost the entire conversation. You've lost everybody. And now you're feeding into the brain rotted community that we unfortunately are a part of. Because at the same side of the coin, right, you can turn this around. Like, there's a couple things I want to point out. One, you can turn around that same logic and apply it to Survivor. You can say, well, body blocking is an exploit, and also getting down under pallets with emotes is an exploit, and also using using gen progression stacking is also an exploit. And also you can say, like, you know what I mean? You can just keep listing a bunch of things in the game and call them exploits, and then there will be a lot of people that agree. But then a Survivor player will listen to that and say, that makes no sense. Like, we're just doing our objective. How does that applicable in the situation? That's number one. Number two, I think that it's already telling and within the video, if you're trying to claim that tunneling and slugging and camping are exploits, that you are completely not looking at the entire situation from an objective standpoint. And that right there is not good to hear. You know what I mean? And I think that it's a bit disingenuous to kind of frame it in that way when that's simply not the case. It's not an exploit at all. Like, it's really not. In the same way that survivors also have strategy, is the same way that killer has strategy. And I don't really think you hear a lot of killer players call a lot of what survivors do exploits. Because like there's plenty of stuff that sort of us killers go up against we don't like either, but I don't think we're running around calling them exploits. But there are genuinely exploits, I would say, on survivor end. Another one that I know that is very prevalent that I think very few use, but it's still like a really massive problem, is there's like two that I remember off the bat. One is when they actually they hold shift when they're like going around in the shack, so they break off chase as you're turning the corner so that they can completely leave the window unblocked pretty much the entire time, so they can keep vaulting it basically infinitely, regardless if you mind game it, because if you try to mind game it, they run out the door, and if they don't mind game it, then they'll just shift and wait and then vault it, and then it keeps breaking off chase, so you can't do that. There's another exploit that's on one of those chapel maps that has like a god window there, and because of the way that it is, there's a giant corner that has like right next to that window where they can turn the corner, break off chase, vault the window again, and you will keep breaking off chase over and over and over, and you can't catch up whatsoever. It becomes an infinite. Those are blatant exploits on survivor, right? Like these are prevalent problems, but you know, we're not really hearing everybody on killer like say this is they're exploiting. Like nobody, like I'm pretty sure a good majority of killer players understand what strategy is. So that is like at least where I'm standing with that. So yeah, I think that covers it. I think we kind of understand where we're at in terms of the video here. But yeah, let me make sure I heard correctly here.
And focusing on exploits that aren't engaging is way ability to engage with hypotheticals.
Oh yeah, I also wanted to point out like what we're talking about here. Like a good example I would say is, I'm gonna use this comparison to Call of Duty. Call of Duty fundamentally, right, is you going in a multiplayer competitive experience where you have your weapons and you're going to try to shoot the other team to get points for your team. And let's just say that we apply the same logic of DBD to Call of Duty, and we say, okay, you're not killing people with your gun. Oh, okay, well you shouldn't care, because you know the whole point is you just like jumping up and down and sliding across the map and just like dealing damage to people, but you can't actually kill them because that's not fair. Because that's not how the game works. You should just be happy about just shooting people with your gun and reloading. That's really cool. That's really fun. You should be happy with the high octane experience, not what you bought the game for. That's fundamentally what this logic is trying to say. But the thing is like, at least for me, like looking over this, it seems like there is just this, like, it's like you taking the logic of like, let's just make sure the killers don't do anything with their objectives, and it's wrapped around this whole, it's a good change because it's exploits, so that you justify this ridiculous like line of logic, when in reality this is completely untrue. It's completely untrue and it's completely flawed. At the end of the day, it's a skill issue in the entire player base. Killer and survivor both have a skill issue of some form. In this instance that we're talking about, a skill issue on the survivor end, where they complain with however way you play, claim it's tunneling, and then behavior hears it and thinks, okay, we're gonna have to fix this to keep our players. And because of that, it ends up leading to the ridiculous changes we've seen recently with these PTBs and the patches, all of this stuff. I don't even need to list off all of that. Because I've already spoken extensively about it in the past, so I'll just, for those of you who keep up, I would end up just repeating myself, but you guys already understand what I'm talking about. So if you want to listen to the original video, it'll be linked in the description. I've kind of given my thoughts on it. While you're down there, also consider supporting the channel by becoming a member or joining the Patreon to get exclusive content, perks, other things like that, and also to get your name read at the end of every video. With that being said, also appreciate you guys. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comment section. I know it might have been a bit of a long video, but I had a lot to discuss, a lot to cover. Appreciate you guys. I'll see you guys in the next one, and stay tuned for all those members. Well, I wanted to go ahead and take some time out to thank all my members from Patreon with Pro King 101, My YouTube members, Majora Jeff, N Dyer, Evil Peachy YT, Zero Mocker, Christian, Hexdev, and Crow Vader. And for my Twitch subscribers, Cake is the Road, Danica 2002, Final Girl _ Bunny, Acklefin, Chili Cinderace, Zero Mocker, Ginsburg, Johns 117 _ Lovely Ghost TTV, Jar TTV, Zazabu, and Crow Vader. Just wanted to thank you guys. And if you also want to have your name read off at the end of every video, make sure you join on one of these platforms to get one of those perks, as well as the other perks you get. So appreciate you guys. Thank you guys so much.